collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, the GERI briefcase can revolutionise healthcare for the elderly.
As soon as we can get them out of the hospital, we can transfer them to the community where we are blessed in our country by having a well-functioning home care service.
A new book just out reveals yoga and its light and shadows.
Half of the text in the book comes from sacred books and sources of yoga, from other philosophical systems.
And staying on the literary track, we talk to a poet who's published a book of bilingual poetry.
I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to write.
Karen Anderson-Ranberg is a doctor and a professor of geriatrics at Odense University Hospital and the University of Southern Denmark. Her research field covers old age epidemiology, geriatrics and telemedicine. We're going to talk to her about all of those things now. Karen, the telemedicine in particular, it seems, is going to be coming into its own in the next decade or so because it's going to be a shortcut for so many medical practitioners.
Yes, you're right in that, but we have to look upon it as in a broader perspective. The thing is that we will have so many more older people. We have in Denmark an increase of 100% in the number of 80-plus-year-olds over the coming 20-25 years. And at the same time, we are reducing the number of hospital beds, which will really decrease the hospital capacity we'll have for these older people, which we'll also know are those who are most often hospitalized. They have a lot of diseases. They need the intensive care that you can provide them in the hospitals. But still, some of them might have been better treated at home.
Well, most of them would prefer to be treated at home. How far does what they want play into this? Because if they're happy, then the outcome's usually a little bit better.
Well, you must understand that in Denmark now, you're only hospitalized if you are very ill. It's not like in, I don't know where you come from, but I know in England and Scotland where you have people lying in the hospitals also for rehabilitation. In Denmark, we have an average length of stay in our Department of Geriatrics of around 7-8 days, which is very, very short. And they are all, 99% are admitted acutely, so they're really very ill people. As soon as we can get them out of the hospital, we can transfer them to the community, where we are blessed in our country by having a well-functioning home care service.
But that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Exactly.
If you don't have that infrastructure as a backup, then you stick them in hospital because you don't know what else to do with them.
That's right. So we don't have bed blockers in the same way as you would see in other countries. Yeah.
So you've developed what I think is called the GERI toolbox.
Yeah.
What does that do?
Well, the GERI toolbox, or GERI briefcase as we call it, because it came around from the idea of the COPD briefcase. But it's a fact, it's like a toolbox, as you say. So down in the toolbox, we have all kinds of point-of-care testing equipment where we can measure blood pressure, pulse, oxygen saturation. We have even a bladder scanner, so we can see if people are suffering from urinary retention. We can, as a novel thing, I think it is, we have nurses doing this. They use the toolbox and they are able to do a venipuncture, so we can get real blood and not capillary blood. And then we can measure some basic biochemical compounds in the blood, where when we talk about older people, we are interested in infection, so C-reactive protein, which we be a marker for that, hemoglobin for anemia, and what we call the electrolytes, which will give you an idea of the possible dehydration, which are really common conditions in older people. So that would give you on the spot, you are in the home of the older patient where you have discovered something is going on or something is wrong here, we have to take a closer look at it. Then you use your toolbox and you measure these things, and say either it's kind of you do have to do something about it. You call the GP, you say, okay, I measure this and this, I think she's really bad, we need to do something, what do you suggest? Or the opposite also, which is very important, is that the community nurse says, okay, this is okay. Well, she might just have a bad day, but it's not really something that is acute. It was like that yesterday or 2 days ago too, so we don't really need the acute or the emergency call to the GP.
And
we can wait until
presumably
tomorrow.
the nurse can also then reassure the patient.
Absolutely, that's true, yeah. Now, in Denmark, we're starting to running into a larger study covering 4 municipalities, but we did a pilot study in a smaller municipality on the GERI toolbox or briefcase, and developing it, and also to see how people react when using it. And we see if for both the patients and the nurses, community nurses, it has been a great success, because for the nurses, first of all, they have got this security. In the other days, they could say, okay, this patient looks a bit pale. I know that 5 years ago she had severe bleeding from her stomach and she was acutely admitted. I don't hope this is happening once again. We better get her into the hospital, so they contact the GP and say, I see this and this, I think she's ill, shouldn't we refer her to the hospital? And then the GP sitting in his office, not being able to see a patient, say, yeah, I think you're right, we'll just send her in for just in case, you know. But now she can take the hemoglobin on the spot and see, well, it's not that bad. It is the normal level almost, but it's not really here and now, and the other symptoms are not really supporting it. Let's see, wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, you go to the GP's office, and then they can take care of whatever is going on there. Now, for the patients also, they just love it, because when you're ill as a patient, or you're weak, or something is going on in your body, you don't feel well, the last thing you want to do is to go into a car and go up to your GP's office, because if you could have it at home, it's much better. And the thing is, in Denmark now, that the GPs, they don't make house calls that much anymore, very rarely. So, you know, it's a win-win situation, I think, for many people.
How much does the toolbox cost, or the briefcase? Because the other thing, of course, that all health services are looking at is what's a good buy, what's not a good buy.
Yeah, we're not able to tell you that yet, but we will in the future, and we will do some economical analysis on it. So, of course, it's very expensive. But what I have to also to add to this toolbox is that it is linked to what we call a generic telemedicine platform. So all the information that the nurse has, all the measurements, the assessments she has done out in the home of the patient or the citizen, whatever you call them, are transferred on the spot via an interface up to the sky, the cloud, you could say. In a cloud solution, that's where we have the generic telemedicine platform. And from that generic telemedicine platform, the GP or the hospital, in fact, also can download the information.
So they've got the history immediately.
Exactly. That's the idea.
And the idea, therefore, is, of course, that it is going to save money long term, because you're not using up all the time in the hospital or at the GP surgery to do these tests and then make an assessment and then find the data that backs it up, because the nurse knew she had a bleed how many years ago, but where is that on her records and who accesses those records? We do come here, though, into the thorny issue of data protection, don't we? And I know that's something that people are discussing now with telemedicine and e-health and so on. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's extremely important that we can secure the data for patients, and we can promise them that these data are secure. But in Denmark, we have already a very well-developed, digitalized health platform, you could say. So if I'm a patient, I can log in to the internet with my own personal ID, and I can look up all the data I have in my if I would have any hospital record and see which measurements, what X-ray, what did it say. I can read everything, just like the GP. I wouldn't be able to understand it, perhaps, unless I was a medically qualified person, which I am, luckily. But, I mean, they are there. They are open to everyone. So people are already used to that way, and maybe you're not so scared of it in Denmark, because we are.
You're already there.
We are there. Yeah. It's a country of registers. We live by them, you could say, and on them also. So it's very essential in our daily life. And of course, there can always be a breach somewhere. You can never guarantee a system 100%, but it's so rare, and we have had. As far as I know, we don't really have had any breaches. And I know as a hospital working person also, everything I do on the computer with the medical record or patient records is logged. So they will see, have I been looking, I'm a geriatrician, so if I've been looking at an infant in the pediatric department, then somebody will come after me, because I had no right to go in there. I have only right to see my own patients within my own department. You see?
And what about the sharing of data between doctors? Because let's say one of your patients requires the services of a surgeon. How is that data therefore shared?
All data from the hospital, all the visits in the outpatient clinics. When people are discharged from the hospital, there's a discharge letter to the GP and also to the municipality if you receive home care. So people know that. It's that way. It goes always from the hospital to a treating physician. The problem is maybe more that we don't get the information from the GP, because they are kind of private companies, you know. They own their own office in a way, so it's private, so they don't share automatically. So I cannot read what's in the medical record at the GP's office on this particular patient. So there I have to rely on the information they give to me. The only exception is if there's blood measurements or biochemical measurements, biochemistry. They are embedded in a national database, so I can look it up and see, okay, if I'm in a hospital, or even also this nurse in the home can actually access these older biochemical data and see, okay, I can see this hemoglobin.
So you get a holistic picture?
Yeah.
It's an exciting time to be involved with old people, and the more and more of them that there are who seem to be now willing to be a participant in their medical care. Because I think back in the day when people went to their doctor, he wrote a prescription and you went away and did as he said, you wouldn't dare question why he'd done something. That's all changed.
Absolutely.
And it does seem that the generation that was brought up with that sort of medical health care is now beginning to see that they must participate too for a better outcome.
Well, we're talking about geriatrics, and I'm dealing with the weakest ones. And we should remember that the older you get, the more heterogeneous the population becomes. Because you have centenarians who are very well functioning, not demented, taking care of themselves, only minor diseases, and at the other end you would have a 70-year-old who has been really debilitated for many years in need of personal care day and night. So, you know, you don't see that in younger persons. So it's so difficult to say that older people are like this, because they are a million things. What we are dealing with are those who uses the hospital most. That would be the frailest, the most diseased, those who are polypharmacy, taking more than 5 medications, having more than 2 or 3 diseases at the same time, what we call multimorbidity, and also weak in other ways. So we're really trying to get to those who needs us most. There will still be a group of older people who could take care of their own lives and who could do all these gadget things that you on your mobile phone. They exist, absolutely, and they will increase also. Yeah. But right now, I have the 80-plus-year-olds born before or just around World War II, just before. When the baby boomers come, that will be a different situation.
Will indeed. And we've been talking to Dr. Karen Andersen-Renberg about healthy ageing and the GERI toolbox, or GERI briefcase, which is going to turn around care for old people in the coming years. Yoga, Light and Shadows is the title of a new book that's out. It's not just a book about yoga, it's rather more. We could call it a coffee table book. It's got fabulous photos taken here in Cyprus, but with the photos there is text that has a special meaning. So let's talk to the person who chose the text and put the book together, Christina Vassiliadi. Christina, you're very much, aren't you, into not just the exercising in yoga, but let's say the lifestyle, the thinking behind the whole idea of yoga, because some people don't understand that it is more than just the exercises.
Oh yes, it is much more than the physical exercise. Yoga, in its practical form, let's say, is a philosophical system which offers us guidelines to make the body and the mind healthier, more resistant to stress, and more adaptable, let's say, to the challenges of life. But it also goes beyond this and shows us ways to turn inwards, be more in touch with our inner self, and perhaps develop the potentials of the body, the mind, the spirit, and even revive the wisdom that is inside. And this is the wisdom that also perhaps can lead us to the utmost purposes of life, such as realizing our true nature, finding true happiness, and awaken our capacity to love without limits, of universal love.
You've got a degree in, I think, psychology and then a master's in clinical exercise physiology.
Yeah.
How do you apply that to the yoga that you teach?
Well, clinical exercise physiology, which falls under exercise science and sports and exercise medicine, can be seen as a baby to yoga and yoga therapy, since it incorporates physical exercise paired with healthy eating, thinking, and lifestyle habits. Yoga therapy is an ancient art of healing, and it integrates physical and mental exercise, cleansing, breathing, relaxation techniques, and an overall healthy lifestyle for treating physical as well as mental health issues. The application of yoga therapy, combined with the newest updates of exercise science and clinical exercise physiology, has excellent outcomes and can be a very, very powerful system of therapy. So in my practice, apart from teaching the yoga classes at our studio, I run an exercise science setting where I mainly offer consultations and prescriptions, combining the art of yoga therapy alongside the guidelines of contemporary exercise science, and I do supervise therapeutic exercise sessions as well.
So the emphasis is on exercise, and I think it's fair to say that particularly with an ageing population, which we know is happening all over the world, exercise must be part of, if you like, their lifestyle, not just to stay healthy, but maybe to prevent the onset of conditions.
Yes. It's not just for the elderly, but it's for everybody. The medical science, and starting with the American College of Sports Medicine, which is the leading authority on exercise, now sees exercise as medicine. It is a direct means of preventing as well as curing most, if not all, kinds of health conditions. Exercise and physical activity, especially when it is individualized, brings many benefits. It lowers the risk of cardiovascular diseases, cancer, osteoporosis, diabetes. It improves the function of the immune and respiratory systems. It increases energy levels and its quality, and promotes longer and healthier life in general. Yoga, and specifically certain kinds of yoga, brings all the benefits of exercise I just mentioned, and comes to add even more to those, with the breathing, relaxation, and the more meditative techniques, It works directly on stress management and greatly improves psychological well-being.
Now let's talk about the book itself and the text in the book, because it is a coffee table book. It's full of huge colour photographs, but the title, Light and Shadows, has a particular meaning that I think you bring out in the text. So can you explain that?
Yes. I will first say that half of the text in the book comes from sacred books and sources of yoga, from other philosophical systems, as well as from words of enlightened men. The other half of the text is my views on life experiences and on what is regarded as good or bad, positive and negative, in relation to people, events, thoughts and emotions. The book is about the light, the absolute truth, and its shadows, the forms we may take through the course of our soul's journey. And yes, the text was not put there by chance, and each picture has a direct relation to the text. And it may be seen like a playful enigma when trying to see how and why they associate.
Tell me a little bit about the photographer, because I think he was a Frenchman and you got involved with him when you had already had the concept of the book.
Yes, it was an enjoyable experience working with Jean-Emmanuel. Although he had never come across yoga before, he quickly got into the essence of the concept and adapted in capturing the asana images. And while initially I had taken a few draft photos for this project and knew exactly the places of my students at the particular location and the angles from which I would like the final shots to be taken by Jean-Emmanuel, he fully respected and accepted what I had in mind and proceeded based on that. Then he came to add more gems of his inspiring lens vision.
Can I ask you finally, Christina, what you think and hope that people who buy the book are going to get out of it?
Well, Dr. Vairia, whose foreword we are truly honored to have in the book, describes the book as a true expression of love, meaning universal love, through the union of yoga and nature. Well, it would be beautiful to know that this expression, this energy, can reach the reader's hearts and speak directly to the soul. People come to me and say things like, "This is one of the most life-inspiring and soul-healing books I've ever had," or that they go back to the book again and again in their quality time to either dwell in the meaning of the texts or simply drift their gaze into what the pictures present. I think that this book can offer beautiful and unique images coupled with pleasant and spirit-nourishing reading. And just as this creation came so naturally out of my heart and spirit, I hope that it may so naturally touch people's hearts and inner home, and perhaps reawaken our wisdom inside, rekindle the light, and expand our capacity to love without limits, of universal love.
So, can you give us a quote from the book?
Sure. A rebirth, a new beginning, can be created at any time. And the only time that truly exists is the present.
And we've been talking to Christina Vassiliadou about the Yoga, Light and Shadows book. You will find it at amazon.co.uk, shortly I think at Amazon in the US, and of course in all good bookshops across the island. And you can, if you can't get to a bookshop, go to their website because they will courier it to you wherever you happen to live. You'll find their website at www.geri, isyoga.com.cy or look for them on Facebook. Search for Is Yoga Cyprus.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Literary Cyprus was an event held recently at the Point Centre for Contemporary Art in the centre of Nicosia. Now, they had all sorts of things going on with meeting the authors, meeting the poets, and we're meeting one of the poets because his bilingual book, Buttoned Up Shapes by George Tardios, was one of the highlights of the weekend. He joins us now. George, when did you start writing poetry?
I started writing at school. I went to a secondary modern, and in fact there was two jobs you could do when you left school. It was either to be a toolmaker, which was a City and Guilds course, and you became an apprentice, or you worked in Dunn's hat factory, which I didn't want to do either of them. I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to write. So I went and attended a class where I was the only bloke amongst a class of girls to learn shorthand and typing. And I did learn shorthand and typing. And then when I was interviewed by the youth employment officer at my school, I said I want to be a journalist. I can work on the local paper and eventually pick up from there and go to Fleet Street if possible. He said, well, the only job I've got is this one. He said, it involves writing. It's a clerk in an estate agent's office. And I said, how does that involve writing? He said, you write letters. So that was it. I walked out. And eventually I was expelled from school. So all of this went by the wayside anyway. I worked as a window cleaner. Gradually, I'd always been writing, so it had no value. Nobody said that this is worthwhile doing or
You wrote because you just enjoyed writing, but at that stage, was it poetry or short stories or what?
It was poetry and short stories.
So, how did you then become, let's say, a full-time poet?
I was 25 when I went to college, which was as a mature student. And when I left, I was offered a writing scholarship in this manor house, which was incredible. It was in the middle of Devon. I couldn't sleep at night because beams would creak, and I was not used to this kind of thing. Sheep were in the fields outside. I was used to traffic noises, having come from London. And eventually this house became the Avon Foundation, which is a residential creative writing centre. And I remember the founder of it coming down to see me, and he said, my betting is if you take over running this house as the Avon Foundation, he said, my betting is that you will begin to write, and which is what happened.
So tell us about the book, Bilingual. Did you write the Greek as well, or was it translated from English?
It was translated by an amazing translator called Thespina Birketi, who translated it, and I think she's honoured the poems wonderfully in that she's kept the essence of them, because it's very hard to translate.
Well, it's published by Armida Publications and I am sure available in all good bookshops. So what's next?
I've also written a book on Tanzania ages back, in 1981-82. We went to Tanzania to do an expedition which was following the route that Stanley took when he went to find Dr. Livingstone. So we completed the journey. It took us 2 years and 12 days to do. People thought it was impossible. The Royal Geographical Society interviewed me. They turned us down completely. They said it was impossible. It wasn't impossible. Nothing is impossible. We did it anyway. And I've written a book about the journey only now, because when we left and came back, I was meant to have written a book then. I had post-traumatic stress, believe it or not. And I saw somebody called Richard Sturgeon, who was the doctor who saw the Falklands returnees. He diagnosed me as having post-traumatic stress.
From the journey?
From the journey, yeah.
So this is all in the book. What's it called and when's it coming out?
It's called Lay Down Your Heart. I hope it will come out in about a year's time.
We've been talking to George Tardios, who was one of the speakers and book signers, should we say, at the Literary Cyprus event recently at the Point Centre for Contemporary Art, and his bilingual book of poetry is called Buttoned Up Shapes. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.